Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, former President Trump warning Michigan voters about the threat China's electric car industry poses to American carmakers. Plus a 200% tariff promise to keep the swing state's pillar industry safe.
If I don't win, you will have no auto industry within 2 to 3 years. It'll all be gone.
The U.S. disrupting a major Chinese hacking group nicknamed Flax Typhoon. And charges against a Chinese military hacker have been unsealed. It's the latest U.S. bust targeting Chinese intelligence gathering. China hit 9 U.S. defense firms with sanctions over U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. How effective are the measures? Former President Trump spotlighting threats posed by China's electric car industry in a Michigan rally Tuesday. In his first public appearance since the apparent second assassination attempt, Trump had a major warning for the swing state.
If I don't win, you will have no auto industry within 2 to 3 years. It'll all be gone. And I know you got a little bit of an increase. It doesn't mean that's the small stuff because it's just a temporary thing. Because you will not have any manufacturing plants. China is going to take over all of your business because of the electric car and because they have the material we don't.
China dominates the EV industry. The country sells almost 60% of the electric cars in the world. China-based company Cattle is the world's largest battery maker for electric vehicles. The U.S. now has over 30 EV battery factories being planned or up and running. Spurred by incentives from President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, Trump casted doubt on America's position in the race for EV dominance.
What we have is a thing called gasoline. We have gasoline. We have so much gasoline we don't know what to do. They don't have gasoline. So why are we making a product that they dominate? They're going to dominate. You will not have a car industry left, not even a little bit of a car industry.
China was the second largest importer of U.S. petroleum last year. This week, Trump added he would place a 200% tariff on Chinese-made cars coming into the U.S. through Mexico. That's as some fear China is working to evade duties by building cars in Mexico and sending them across the border.
We're going to charge them, I'm telling you right now, I'm putting a 200% tariff on, which means they're unsellable. Unsellable in the United States. And then you wonder why it gets shot at, right? You know, only consequential presidents get shot at.
Trump imposed a 25% tariff to keep Chinese EVs out during his term. President Biden kept that policy and raised the number to 100%, effective later this month. Trump also said he would impose a reciprocal trade tax on Chinese products.
I said, you got to build plants. You don't build plants here, we're going to put the tariffs on your products coming in from China.
The rapid development of Chinese EVs have alerted bigwigs in the U.S. auto industry. Ford's CEO called Chinese EVs, quote, an existential threat after returning from China. Tesla's Elon Musk said the Chinese car makers are the most competitive in the world. At a cybersecurity conference on Wednesday in Washington, FBI Chief Christopher Wray disclosed that the U.S. disrupted a major Chinese hacking group just last week, nicknamed Flax Typhoon. This is the second major China-based hacking group the agency has uncovered.
Their chairman has publicly admitted that for years his company has collected intelligence and performed reconnaissance for Chinese government security agencies. Flax Typhoon was targeting critical infrastructure across the U.S. and overseas, everyone from corporations and media organizations to universities and government agencies.
Wray said the FBI has wrested control of thousands of compromised devices from Flax Typhoon. He explained that the Chinese group had disguised itself as an IT service company for years, but in fact it had been operating under the direction of the Chinese Communist regime, hunting for confidential data in the U.S. Flax Typhoon targeted a wide range of devices that can connect to the internet, like cameras, video recorders, and storage devices. Half of those hijacked devices were located here in the U.S. Beyond the cybersecurity update, Wray also reassured the public that his agency has zeroed in on investigating the apparent second Trump assassination attempt.
Turning to another major cyber threat, charges against a Chinese military hacker have been unsealed. Wray is a member of the Chinese military.
He's accused of hacking a U.S. company just days after it sued a Chinese competitor for stealing trade secrets in 2017. The Justice Department alleges Wade stole critical information. The hacked data was connected to the company's military and civilian communication devices. If convicted, Wray faces up to 20 years in prison for wire fraud, plus additional time for charges related to identity theft. The U.S. has recognized CCP-backed cyber attacks as a top threat to national security.
There has been a marked increase in the rate of similar cases in recent months. According to an Epoch Times review of court records, the Justice Department has brought forth dozens of CCP-directed espionage and foreign agent cases in the past 4 years, resulting in at least 13 convictions or pleas. It's worth noting that more than half of those occurred this year, including 3 in the past month. China is announcing new sanctions on 9 U.S. military-linked firms. The Wednesday statement follows the approval of a new round of U.S. weapons sales to Taiwan.
The firm's property inside China would be frozen, and Chinese entities are banned from transacting with these U.S. firms. The firms impacted include Sierra Nevada Corporation and Stick Rudder Enterprise. The measures are effective from today. This comes a day after the U.S. State Department approved a $228 million military sale to Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party sees Taiwan as its own territory, despite never having ruled it. Washington doesn't have diplomatic ties with the island, but it's bound by law to sell weapons to Taiwan so it can defend itself. Beijing has called on the U.S. to refrain from selling weapons to Taiwan. This May, Beijing sanctioned 12 U.S. defense contractors over arms sales to Taiwan, including Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics.
The effects of these sanctions appear largely symbolic. Military cooperation between the U.S. and China has been suspended since 1989, after Beijing fired at unarmed student protesters asking for democracy. The death toll from the pager explosions in Lebanon has risen to 12. At least 2,800 others were wounded. Lebanon's health minister said some 300 people remain critically wounded. Hundreds of handheld pagers used by the Hezbollah terrorist group exploded near simultaneously across Lebanon Tuesday. American and other officials confirmed to media that Israel is behind the explosions of pagers. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. did not know about, nor was it involved in, the explosions. A Taiwanese company that makes pagers denied producing the devices that exploded. The company Gold Apollo said it authorized its brand on the pagers, but that another company based in Hungary manufactured them. It's not exactly clear how the pagers were made to detonate. An intelligence specialist suggests that explosive devices were integrated into the pagers. Coming up, for the first time, a Chinese aircraft carrier appeared at Japan's doorstep, just 24 nautical miles from the nation's coastline and neighboring Taiwan. A Japanese steel company looking to buy out American giant U.S. Steel. What will the merger mean for the U.S. alongside Washington's efforts to counter China? An expert breaks it down.
We're really in this together against China.
And an American scholar reveals a Chinese Communist Party tactic used to control the masses. He likens what's happening under CCP rule to a giant coiled snake. More on the details in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Japan on alert over recent Chinese activity. Tokyo said Wednesday a Chinese aircraft carrier sailed between 2 of its islands near Taiwan. Japan said it's the first time the Chinese Navy has come that close, within 24 nautical miles of Japan's coastline.
These circumstances are totally unacceptable from the perspective of our national and regional security environment.
This comes a month after a Chinese Navy survey ship entered Japanese waters shortly after an airspace breach. In July, a Japanese Navy destroyer entered China's territorial waters near Taiwan. An uptick in Chinese military activities near Japan and Taiwan has stoked concerns in Tokyo, as you're hearing. Japan has responded with a defense buildup, saying it aims to deter China from using military force to push territorial claims.
Amid rising tensions between China and the West, a growing number of foreigners have reported being attacked by Chinese citizens. A 10-year-old student was stabbed by a man about 200 yards from his school, a Japanese school in southern China. According to a Chinese official, the student was immediately sent to the hospital and the attacker was taken into custody at the scene. The motive remains unclear, but it could be linked to one of the most read hashtags on Chinese social media recently, the September 18th incident. This year marks 93 years since the Japanese military invaded China's northeast region. The Japanese embassy sent out an email to its citizens living in China, warning them to be cautious about knife attacks in recent months. 3 months ago, another knife attack targeted a Japanese mother and her child in southeast China. And 4 U.S. instructors were also stabbed by a Chinese man earlier in June during a visit to China. A Japanese steel company wants to take over American manufacturing giant U.S. Steel. The merger is under U.S. government review right now, with support and pushback from both sides of the aisle. How does Beijing play into the decision? We spoke to Anders Corr, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and principal at Corr Analytics, to get his take. Anders Corr, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Now, there's been a lot of talk around Japan's Nippon Steel buying U.S. steel. We have the likes of President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Trump all against this. And we also have CFIUS weighing in on national security grounds, saying, Japan shouldn't own this U.S. company. But taking a step back here, what are the pros and cons of Nippon Steel buying U.S. steel?
I think the biggest pro is that Nippon has promised to invest $2.7 billion into modernizing steel plants here in the United States.
To your point, right, from the U.S. perspective, this deal would invest in the American industry. All the top shareholders are U.S. companies, and Nippon Steel itself is not Japan. It's actually publicly traded, in your recent piece about this topic. Now, given all of that, why do you think there's been so much pushback against this deal?
America has a long history of resisting Japanese investment as Japanese rose in the 70s, 80s, 90s. We did lose a lot of business to Japan in terms of this auto imports, for example. But in terms of this particular deal, it's pretty darn good. The local unions here in Pittsburgh, not the national level union, but the local steelworkers union in Pittsburgh supports it. Because they know there's going to be more jobs, more investment, and also all the business community in the United States supports it.
And on that note, I want to zoom out a bit here, as you mentioned earlier, and also in your piece, that this merger could actually boost the company from its current $18 billion revenue to $80 billion. What would that mean in terms of the global competition with an adversarial country like China?
It's going to make the two companies much stronger. It's going to provide a lot more money that's there in case and a cushion basically for jobs in the United States, a lot more revenues. And also, it's not only China we are competing with. We're competing with less expensive steel coming from India. But China, of course, is the most important because it's an adversary country.
And on that note, of course, many people say Japan is important to the U.S. strategically. From an economic perspective, why would Japan be important to the U.S.?
Japan is really dependent on the United States for its own national security. So there's not a very high likelihood that it would do anything to U.S. steel, for example, to hurt U.S. national security, which would ultimately hurt Japanese national security. So we're really in this together against China, I think, and there's no reason for us to, look a gift horse in the mouth, essentially. The other issue is that there are ongoing negotiations with Japan about exporting semiconductors and equipment to make semiconductors, which Japan has excellent equipment to do so, to China. China wants to import this Japanese equipment. The United States obviously does not want that stuff going to China. And I think probably in negotiations, there was just information leaked yesterday that the semiconductor negotiations are nearing a deal where Japan would not send stuff to China. Probably that deal is linked to the steel deal.
Anders Corr, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And now to the South China Sea. A U.S. Air Force competition appeared to involve a simulated mission near a Chinese military base. A photo from the competition shows a pilot and sensor operator carrying out the simulated mission. One of the screens above their heads shows a map of Mischief Reef, an island in the South China Sea occupied by China. Multiple countries claim parts of the South China Sea, while Beijing claims almost all of it. And the regime has been turning islands into military bases, the Mischief Reef being one of them. Both President Biden and former President Trump will meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi next week. India is one of America's major allies in the Indo-Pacific region and an ally in countering Beijing. Trump called India a very big abuser of the U.S.-India trade relationship in remarks Tuesday in Flint, Michigan. Take a listen.
So when India, which is a very big abuser, he happens to be coming to meet me next week, and Modi, he's fantastic. I mean, fantastic man.
Trump did not elaborate on where they would meet. He did not specifically criticize India on trade issues. Trump and Modi enjoyed warm relations when the former president was in office. When Trump visited India in 2020, Modi held a huge rally for him that also marked the opening of the world's largest cricket stadium. When Modi visited the U.S. in 2019, he and Trump showed each other with praise at a rally in Texas. Polls show a tight race between Trump and Harris, who is of Indian origin. Meanwhile, President Biden will hold a summit with the leaders of Australia, India, and Japan on September 21st in Delaware.
And in Taiwan, a renowned American scholar is drawing attention to a tactic the Chinese Communist Party is using to control people: fear. Professor Perry Link says people's fear towards the CCP prompts them to self-censor. Link spoke at a top Taiwanese research institution last week. He highlighted how China's authoritarian regime represses both its own people and those abroad. During his talk, Link described the CCP censorship as a giant anaconda coiled in an overhead chandelier. The anaconda symbolizes danger that could strike at any moment, though no one knows when. Because of it, people live in fear and avoid taking risks that could trigger it. In plain language, he explained that under an authoritarian regime, that self-censorship comes from the fear created by the regime's political power.
The limits of self-censorship are vague. The regime deliberately makes it vague. For instance, if I'm told I can't visit China and the blacklist doesn't provide a reason, the lack of clarity will make me more likely to self-censor out of fear and uncertainty.
Link was blacklisted by the CCP for helping a prominent Chinese dissident escape China following the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. He explained that some young people would self-censor when they saw him being blacklisted and avoid talking about sensitive topics.
Among the victims of the CCP, there are various groups such as the Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, Falun Gong practitioners, and intellectuals labeled as activists, among others. However, on the issue of the anaconda in the chandelier, I believe mainstream society has also become a victim.
On the subject of Taiwanese independence, Ling says U.S. academia often avoids using the word independence. Instead, it's referred to as the Taiwan Strait issue out of fear of provoking Beijing. The Chinese Communist Party claims the self-ruled democratic island as its own territory and has threatened to forcibly take it over. That's despite never having ruled Taiwan. Chinese leader Xi Jinping recently heaped praise on the Chinese regime's rubber stamp legislature, calling the National People's Congress. He described it as a tool to transition power from leaders to the people under Communist Party rule. But experts say China's totalitarian system merely disguises itself as democracy. Let's dive in.
Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping described the National People's Congress as an innovation in politics. The Chinese Congress is often called rubber stamp legislature in the West. That's because the so-called Congress has never voted a single proposal put forward by the Chinese regime's top leadership. What's more, the body's representatives aren't elected by Chinese citizens, but appointed by the CCP. Some members have also made comments openly. Shen Jilan served as a member of the body for 13 terms. He once stated, quote, "As a representative, I follow the party's orders. I've never voted against the party." Lai Jinping, a Chinese human rights lawyer residing in the United States, tells NTD that China's rubber stamp legislature is an extreme form of authoritarianism.
People can only choose from candidates selected and approved by the CCP. If ordinary citizens try to run for office, the CCP will suppress them and throw them into prison.
Independent candidates regularly face repression. The most striking example is Yao Lingfang from central China. He ran for office multiple times and won by a large margin in 1998. He was known for exposing misconduct by local officials during his term. His efforts reportedly led to ongoing harassment. Yao went missing after he was arrested in 2011. His whereabouts are still unknown.
These representatives only serve the CCP's authoritarian power. You have to follow the party's orders to stay in the position. Otherwise, you risk being removed. This means you're not accountable to the citizens. Instead, you answer only to those who appointed you and to the authoritarian system that put you in the position. The general public is irrelevant to your role.
A Chinese professor at the Central Party School of the CCP estimated that 70% of delegates to the rubber stamp legislature are members of the CCP. Much of the remaining 30% is made up of leaders and executives from major companies, which are largely under Beijing's control.
Coming up on NTD, stay tuned for America's Hope with Kelly Wright. Tonight, an interview with attorney Keisha Hebben-Johnson dives into her inspiring journey from tough neighborhoods in North Philadelphia and Camden to achieving her dreams. She shares her experiences with overcoming adversity and highlights the importance of compassion and empathy. Plus, media innovator Crystal Berger discusses her business journey and the process of overcoming challenges. That's tonight at 10 p.m. after China in Focus. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.